Hey guys, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Just want to let everyone know that at the end of this stream, I'll be doing a live drawing for 2 winners. The one winner will get 25 KSM and a Kusama t-shirt, and the second winner will get a t-shirt. Can everybody hear my mic okay? All right, perfect. All right, so tonight I'll be presenting about Kusama, which is Polkadot's canary network. Specifically, I'll talk about the ways that you can participate on Kusama through governance or through building an application or as an end user, just experimenting with the chain. So first, a little bit about myself. I'm from the technical education team at Web3 Foundation. I've mostly been focused on building the Polkadot wiki. And I've been working on some internal tooling as well. So let's jump straight into what Kusama is, in case anybody doesn't yet know. So Kusama is a canary network, and the name canary comes from the idea of canary in the coal mine. So canaries were used in coal mines to give warning to miners in case there was some kind of poisonous gas inside of the mine. So in a similar way, Kusama is a warning to any kind of vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the Polkadot code base. So that for the mainnet Polkadot launch, the code base has been hardened. So it's the same code base as Polkadot, but it's a very early, unaudited release. But further than this, it's more than just a testnet because it's intended to be a testbed for new features as well. So as more and more features get rolled out, eventually to Polkadot, they'll first land in Kusama. And once people have gotten a chance to experiment with them in Kusama, they will eventually move over to Polkadot proper. So it's really a lower value network that allows developers to move fast and loose. If you're familiar with kind of the Litecoin, Bitcoin dynamic, where Litecoin is kind of a lower value and kind of intended to be a more experimental network than Bitcoin, which moves a lot slower. You can think of Kusama as kind of the Litecoin to Polkadot's Bitcoin. So the big question everybody always asks is Kusama a testnet? Or maybe they don't even ask this, they just assume Kusama is a testnet. Well, the answer is no. Kusama is more than a testnet. A testnet is usually a playground where the tokens have no value. Whereas for Kusama, being a canary network, it's focused on R&D and the tokens have a lower value, but they do still have some kind of value to them. So a quick timeline for where we're at with Kusama. So in summer of 2019, claims were opened up. These were pre-Genesis claims for any holders of the dot indicator to make an Ethereum transaction, which would allow them to be in the Genesis block for Kusama and claim their KSM in the Genesis block. So this opened up around July. About a month and a half later, on August 23rd, the actual genesis of Kusama happened. So the network started. It was still kind of in this proof of authority phase where the only validators were ran by Web3 Foundation or Parity. And kind of the only functionality on the network at the time was to make on-chain claims or to make these validator intentions, which kind of signaled that you wanted to be a validator. So fast forward a couple months, lots of bug fixes were getting into the network. The network transitions to proof of stake. So if you've been in the Riot rooms lately, or you've been maybe even validating on Kusama, you probably already know this very well, that there's currently 150 validators on Kusama. It's a proof of stake network today. And yeah, so this has happened. It was originally thought that the governance would come at the same time. So the governance portion of Kusama is still kind of in this proof of authority phase, where Sudo, which is kind of like a central super user, still holds the final say for any kind of governance decision on Kusama. So kind of the next step, and we're expecting it very soon, is that Sudo, super user, will relinquish their power and transition Kusama fully to the KSM holders of the network. So why is it important that Kusama has value? So it's important because blockchains are inherently economic systems. And they use incentives and disincentives to regulate the behavior of their stakeholders. So if Kusama was just a testnet with no value, we would be able to observe some behaviors that we could expect stakeholders to show in Polkadot, but we wouldn't really have a good kind of example or kind of like a lab for that, because there's just some behaviors that won't really come out unless there's real value on the line. So the fact that Kusama does have value makes it so that these economic gains that are baked into the Polkadot governance, baked into the Polkadot protocol, are able to play themselves out fully in Kusama first. So what will Kusama become? Well, first of all, there's no kill switch for Kusama. At least once it's unleashed and governance takes a hold of it. Of course, governance is all powerful, so the stakeholders could at some point vote to end Kusama if that was the will of the KSM holders. But kind of the idea is that there's no way to turn it off. So the community will end up deciding the ultimate fate of what happens to the Kusama network. A couple really interesting directions it could go into is that it could connect to Polkadot via a bridge, or it could be one of the first cases of a hierarchical sub-relay chain when Polkadot version 2 comes. So now the topic of this talk is how to participate on Kusama. So there's a few kind of roles that someone can take to participate on the Kusama network. I'll just quickly outline them. So one role you can take is a builder. So this is someone who builds applications, builds parachains, parathreads, bridges, block explorers. They're either developers or they're working with a development team. So because Kusama has a lot of the same features as Polkadot mainnet will have, it's expected that a lot of teams that are building for Polkadot or want to build for Polkadot are able to build their applications on Kusama and have nearly the same exact experience as they will have on Polkadot. Because Kusama is lower value, it might actually make sense for some teams to deploy their parachain onto Kusama before deploying onto Polkadot, because acquiring a parachain slot on Kusama will probably be a lot cheaper. The next role of participation is of the maintainer. So the maintainer is either a validator, maybe a nominator, or eventually a collator. So right now it's mostly just the validator who is maintaining the network. So this is someone who stakes tokens, is at the risk of being slashed, but also earns rewards for performing their validation duties. The next role is this role of direction, this role of governance, participating with how Kusama evolves, what Kusama will turn into. So, yeah, this is someone who uses their KSM to vote in referenda, to elect counselors. Maybe they themselves run for a counselor position, but they also could be someone who writes or codes the proposals, a person who comes up with the new ideas for where the Kusama network should go. And then last but not least, we have the end user. So this is probably most people who will be participating on Kusama. This is the person who uses applications that are built on Kusama, or maybe uses the chain to make transfers, or to once in a while do some nice stuff with it. So the next question is obtaining KSM. How can that be done? So right now, because we're still in this kind of limited feature soft launch phase, there's not really a lot of ways to obtain KSM. So right now, the major way is that if you are a dot holder, so someone with a dot indicator tokens, then you can claim an equivalent amount of KSM on chain. Yeah, so a lot of people have done this already. If you haven't done this yet and you have some dot indicators, you should go do this right after the crowdcast. So once we exit out of soft launch phase and transfers are enabled, probably very soon thereafter, there's going to be a frictional proof of work faucet that will require mining vanity address. So this is probably a very low difficulty thing to do. Probably anyone with a computer could mine this address in a few minutes. But you'll mine an address containing the letters KSMA, and then you'll make a post on GitHub. And I believe once a day, KSM will be sent out to everybody who mined one of these addresses. Now, this faucet won't last forever. Eventually, it'll dry up. But definitely after the transition to the fully featured network, this will be the best way to obtain KSM. But there's also some other good ways to obtain maybe larger amounts of KSM than you would get from the faucet. One of these ways is through grants. So if you're someone who wants to be a builder, or if you're someone who wants to really participate in governance, you can get a grant. You can apply for and get a grant from the Web3 Foundation. And then after transfers are enabled, you could obtain them from others. And then we have a bug bounty program as well. So if you're a hacker and you think you can break Kusama in some way, then you might get rewarded for doing that, depending on if it's a known vulnerability or not. And the tagline of Kusama is to expect chaos. So like I mentioned before, it's early, it's unaudited. Things will probably break at some point. but they'll get fixed, and that's kind of the process of Kusama. So when you participate in Kusama, expect to participate in a little bit of chaos. All right, so yeah, so that's kind of the informational part of this first part of the crowdcast. For the second part, I want to kind of demonstrate the different aspects of what you'll be able to do on Kusama as soon as the full features are enabled. So if you want to follow along, I have a slightly modified build of Polkadot. The same version that currently is running on Kusama, except all the transfers are enabled and all the current restrictions have been removed. So this is just for demonstration purposes. But if you want to follow along with some of the things I'll walk through in just a minute, you can go ahead and run this Docker command with me. So I'll take a quick break and I'll look through these questions. Let's see. So I'll answer a few of the ones who, yeah, I'll answer, I guess, a couple of the top ones. What is the USP that makes it a killer feature to choose over others? How are you thinking about adoption? So I'm not actually familiar with the acronym USP, but I can tell you what I think the killer feature is. And I think the killer feature is the governance. So the way that Kusama is able to adapt to its users and evolve over time to become something potentially completely different and completely new than it will be when it's unleashed. How are you thinking about adoption? So really about adoption, I think we're all four of those roles I mentioned before. I think all of those are important facets of adoption. Builders are going to build more applications, but we also need people to help out test the governance and yeah, and to use the applications as well. Okay, I'll answer one more and then I'll answer the rest of them at the end. So does KSM have monetary value? So KSM is just a token, and it's a utilitarian token. So yeah, but it does have some value. So it's a scarce token, and whatever value the community gives to it is the value that it has. All right, so let me switch over to showing my full screen. Oops. Okay. Okay, so you should see on the screen now a terminal. I have the Docker command that was posted on the slide. So I'll go ahead and run that. Like I said, it's a slightly modified build of the current version of Polkadot that Kusama is running. Okay, so the idea here is that we'll start out super basic. I know that if anyone was at the crowdcast that Bill gave last week, I believe, he went really in depth with accounts on Polkadot, so I won't spend too much time here. Rather, the idea is that I'll just walk through how you could do this using the Polkadot apps dashboard. And I'll just kind of display each of these different facets of what you can do on Kusama. So If you've never used the apps dashboard before, it's a really great graphical interface. I think it's one of the most exciting things about both Kusama and Polkadot is how great of a UI there is to interact with it. So creating an account is super simple. You go to the Accounts tab on the apps dashboard, click Add Account, give a localized name to this account and a password, click Save, and create a backup of the account. So yeah, like I said, just starting out with the super basics here. All right, the next step. So setting a nick. So unless you've been kind of following the Riot rooms pretty closely, you might have missed this feature. It was kind of snuck in. So what is a nick? As you can probably guess, a nick is just a nickname. So just like how I gave this account here a localized nickname, my name, Logan, we can give it a network-wide nickname as well. So the way to do that is in the extrinsics tab, you find the nicks module. Let's see, I'll send this from an account that has some balance already. So I'll use Alice Stash. And then you find the set name transaction there. So it'll ask you for some bytes. So to get these bytes, you use an online hex converter. And yeah, let's use this. So let's say you wanted to give your account a network-wide nickname of Kusama Beast LOL. So here we have the converted hex. You can see this change. Here, we'll just go with Kusama Beast. So we'll just kind of make this a little bit better to copy over. There we go. So we'll copy over this hex into the transaction, click submit. And once that gets mined, so this account will now have the network-wide nickname of Kusama Beast. All right, so moving on. So sending a simple transaction is easy. We'll send some funds from, let's go with, let's say Bob Stash to this Logan account. Okay, so yeah, for that I use the transfer tab. It allows you just to make a transfer of funds. Okay, so those were kind of the very basic things you can do. Once the first two are things you can do on Kusama today. The transfer is something that you'll be able to do very soon once the full features are enabled. So now we'll go into something you might want to do after you have your tokens and you're kind of unsure what you want to do with them. One possibility is to nominate with them. So nominating is staking your tokens to a group of validators, and then you share in the rewards these validators are awarded, but you also have the risk of being slashed with them. So I think the most important thing to know as a nominator is the risk of being slashed. So slashing is just this idea in proof of stake systems that if validators misbehave, they will lose some of their tokens. Since the security of proof of stake systems are derived completely from the tokens that are at stake, being able to slash the tokens, being able to punish misbehaviors is a really important concept of the protocol. So this is something that you need to know as a nominator, because when you nominate your tokens, you'll be nominating them under the responsibility of the approved validators. So if the validators do one of these slashing conditions, such as a babe equivocation, grandpa equivocation, or the validator goes offline, then your tokens that you've nominated are at risk along with the validators. So those first two slashing conditions, the babe and grandpa equivocations, are right now the most severe, and they carry the penalty of up to 100% slash. So Kusama uses what's known as coordinated slashing. So what this means is that the more validators that are caught committing the same offense at the same time, the more that all of them will get slashed. So if you're familiar with kind of BFT consensus and the classic threshold of 1/3, you can see here that if 1/3 of the validators are concurrently caught committing either a babe or a grandpa equivocation, they get slashed severely, 100, which is right now 100%. So this is because 1/3 is kind of this classical security threshold that exists in consensus systems. On the other side, if the validator is just caught offline, if it's just unresponsive, then the maximum slash is 5%. And importantly, it's kind of hidden here, but if a validator is the only one offline, then the slash is actually for 0, but it'll be removed from the validator side. So what does this look like in the apps UI? So we'll go to the staking tab, click on the account actions page, and we'll make a new stake. So we'll use the funds that we have in Bob's stash here, and we'll stake 50 tokens. So this first transaction is a bond transaction. It means that the tokens are being locked into the staking system. So once the tokens are bonded, you'll have to wait what's called the unbonding period until you can get those tokens back and do other things with them. So once the tokens are bonded, you have two choices there. You can either set a session key, which will take you along the path of becoming a validator, or you can choose to nominate, which is what we'll go with here. So when you nominate, you can pick up to 16 validators that you approve of. So when you pick these 16, you don't choose the fixed amount of tokens you nominate to them, but rather you just pick a group, and then something called Fragment's election will actually equalize the stake among the approved validators so that each validator in the active set has roughly equivalent stake behind them. So of course, this depends on how much validators have given themselves a self-stake and what the configuration of approvals is. But in general, the protocol will try to equalize stake behind each of the validators. This is important because each of the validators are paid, again, more or less roughly the same payouts. So we'll see here after we picked a validator and nominated them, you can see down here that we are indeed nominating tokens to this validator. Okay. Now we'll dive more into what I mentioned before is, I think, one of the most exciting features of Kusama, which is the governance system. So for those that might not be so familiar with why governance exists for blockchains, or how it's unique to Kusama and Polkadot, I'll just briefly explain these sentences here. So Kusama, the logic of Kusama is represented as a blob of this WASM bytecode. WASM is WebAssembly, and it's just a format of code. So this bytecode is stored on chain and dictates kind of the entire business logic of the chain. So governance kind of revolves around changing this bytecode and when this bytecode changes and how it changes. So yeah, so the entire state transition function of Kusama is kind of encapsulated within this bytecode. And governance is what determines what is allowed to happen to that. So I won't dive too much into each of these points here, but I'll just briefly show them as a few good points that Kusama's governance tries to align with. So for Kusama, the ultimate power rests in the KSM holders, and they're able to propose referenda. They're also able to vote for counselors. Counselors are then able to approve or deny referenda, as well as do some other things like veto, pick the technical committee, and so on. So Kusama's governance really falls into this tricameral model. So the first chamber is this referendum chamber. It's composed of all KSM holders, all participants in this voting kind of democracy module. The second chamber is the council. The council is elected by the KSM holders on an ongoing basis. The third chamber is the technical committee. So the technical committee is a smaller group than the council. They're voted in by the council, and the idea is that each team that has implemented or specified one part of Kusama or Polkadot's runtime or runtime environment gets one vote on the technical committee. Yeah, and the role of the technical committee is to kind of evaluate what are more urgent proposals and to fast track those proposals so that, let's say there's an important fix or an important upgrade that's more of a technical upgrade, kind of more of an optimization. The technical committee can come in and fast track the proposal so it gets into the code base faster. All right, so the core of KSM governance is what's called democracy. So this is the name of the module, but what it really means is that token holders are able to propose referenda, which are basically just changes to parameters or suggested code changes. And then other KSM holders can back these proposals and later vote for them in a binary fashion. So some examples of proposals that could be put through into Kusama's governance. One is to modify balances of an account. So let's say something happened that wasn't supposed to happen and balances went askew and governance is able to, or let's say the stakeholders of Kusama is able to clearly see this, they can change the balance of an account. This is kind of the most straightforward example of a proposal. Some other proposals are the ability to register or deregister parachains. So let's say there's a parachain that is especially useful to Kusama. Then the token holders can collectively choose to include that parachain. Likewise, if there's a parachain that's doing something really bad to the network, the stakeholders can gather and choose to deregister that parachain. Proposals can also cancel out other proposals, cancel out prior referenda, or modify single parameters, such as the slashing penalties. And like I mentioned before, it could completely change out and swap the Kusama runtime code itself. All right, so instead of going through this slide, I think I'll just jump back over to the app's dashboard and demonstrate the democracy module. So in the democracy tab, there is a blue button to submit a proposal. We'll go ahead and use Bob's Dash again. And we'll make a simple proposal here. So on this dropdown are all the different functionality of the runtime. So we see here the NICs that we used before, democracy, which is what we're using to make this referenda. And but let's use the council. Let's say we want to make a public referendum about proposing to add some members to the council. So let's propose to add Charlie and Dave to the council. So we add a value here. This is the bond that we add to this proposal. And yeah, so right now it goes into this proposal column. And every launch period, proposals from here will move to the top proposal from here will move to the referendum. And once it moves over to the referendum, all KSM holders can vote either aye or nay, yes or no, on this referendum. And depending on which side wins, it's kind of a little more complex than that, because there's also this notion of adaptive quorum biasing, which says that any proposal that goes through the public referendum is more biased to be rejected than passed. So essentially it needs majority plus a little bit more, depending on the turnout to the referendum, to pass this proposal. But let's say that this minimum quorum is reached. This referendum will indeed get passed and set Charlie and Dave to the council. So a couple blocks will go by, and then we'll come back and we'll see this move to a referendum. Now let's briefly talk about the council. So the council on Kusama is currently 13 members. And just like how validators are elected using Fragment's method, Fragment's method is also used to elect the council. So let's go back to the app's dashboard. We can see that the proposal has indeed moved over to a referendum. And we have the ability now to vote on it. So we have some info down here that this would be ending at block 600, which is in 200 blocks. We can see the current block here. It would activate at block 800, which is, so this is 2 launch periods away. So a launch period is kind of just the amount of time that proposals will be live, referendum will be live, and then also the amount of time after a referendum passes that it'll that it'll take to activate. And we see down here that the quorum biasing is that supermajority needs to approve. So let's quickly vote here. And yeah, so for this, we'll only do one vote so that this will have a supermajority. But while that's kind of baking, let's go to the council, and I'll show you how you can submit a candidacy and vote. So again, there's these action buttons here. You click Submit Candidacy, and you can click the account that you want to make a candidate. So we've already suggested Charlie and Dave in the referendum. Now let's put Eve as a candidate here. So we'll just sign and submit this transaction. It'll go through, and we see Eve as a candidate. Now, just like the referendums have a launch period, the council has a term period, or just a term. So every term, the candidates, the election algorithm will run among the members and the candidates. And depending on how the votes are configured, will determine whether or not new candidates become full members. So what do I mean by what do I mean by configuring votes? Well, I just mean more or less which candidates have the highest amount of vote kind of approved to them in this aye or nay fashion. So we'll just use Eve to give a 20 dev vote to herself. So we'll sign it and submit that, and we'll see Eve has 1 vote. Now let's say Ferdy also likes Eve a lot and wants to give 40 dev to Eve's candidacy. So we'll submit that, and we'll see Eve has now 60 dev backing her. So it'll be quite a while, but once this term progresses, we'll see Eve is elected into the live council. And then the last thing I'll show you on the app's dashboard is the treasury. So the treasury is where funds are held that come from inefficiencies in the staking system, validator slashes, and also from transaction fees. So these funds are kind of made available to public token holders to vote on how to spend them. So just like you can make referendum proposals, in the treasury you can make proposals and put up 5% of the spend amount as a bond. And every 6 days on Kusama, the treasury will try to spend any approved proposals. So for a proposal to be approved requires 3/5 of the council to approve it. And any proposal can be rejected if 1/2 of the council chooses to reject. And when a proposal is rejected, this 5% that gets bonded into it at the beginning will get slashed. So in the Treasury tab, in much the same fashion as Democracy and Council, we have a submit a spend proposal button, and we'll make a spend proposal from Alice to Eve for 50 dev. And refresh the page. So we'll see here that 5% of the proposed spend was bonded from Alice. And now this proposal is kind of just waiting here for the council to approve it. Once the council approves it, which it'll likely get approved because only Eve will be on the council at this time, it'll move over to this column. And at the end of the spend period, which again is 6 days, this proposal will get get spent. So 50 dev will get sent from the treasury to ETH. And yeah, so that's the last thing I'll show you on the app's dashboard, but I'll quickly just talk about parachains. So parachains will likely come a little bit after the governance system on Kusama. So right now it's kind of more early days for parachains, but that doesn't mean that you can't get started already. So there might be some people who have played around with Substrate already. There might be some people who are developing Substrate more seriously as well. So this is still the best way to prepare to deploy a parachain on Polkadot. Yeah, quickly, if anyone doesn't know what a parachain is a parallel chain to the Polkadot relay chain. So it's secured by the relay chain, but it has its own state transitions and its own state transition function and operates kind of contained in itself. There's also the parathreads. So parathreads are basically parachains. Everything I said about parachains applies to parathreads as well. The only difference between these two are the way that their blocks are progressed in the relay chain. So parachains will require a parachain slot. You can see down here that these parachains all have parachain slots. Whereas parathreads will participate in a per block auction. So you can see here there's a parathread slot, and there's 5 parachains, or sorry, there's 5 parathreads. Every block, one of these parathreads will be the winner, and will be able to progress their block. The parathread model is pay as you go, whereas the parachain model guarantees full security as well as full throughput. So every relay chain block, the parachain can also progress. If you're curious about building a parachain or a parathread, probably there'll be another presentation on that in the future. But for right now, I just suggest you visit the substrate.dev documentation, and that's the best way to get started. All right, so wrapping up, what is the future of Kusama? So as I said a couple times already, full governance will be enabled soon. The next thing after that will be parachains and ICMP. ICMP is the messaging protocol between parachains. But ultimately, the future of Kusama is up to the community. So whatever the community wants Kusama to evolve into is what it will become. Yeah, so the question is really to you. What would you like Kusama to become? All right, so let me just jump back over here. And let's see, I'll answer a few questions, but before I do that, I'll just put this up here. Okay, so right after I answer the questions, I'll do the drawing for the 2 winners. Okay, so I'll just start at the top here and go and answer from there. So Bruno asks, do NICs offer an alternative to ENS in Ethereum? And if not, what is their specific purpose? So NICs aren't an alternative to ENS. ENS is kind of a much more resilient, robust system than NICs are intended to be. So NICs are kind of just really simple nicknames that you just give your account on chain, just for more or less just for recognizability. So NICs have no way to be unique. So anyone else can use the same nick that you use. So it's not really intended to be an alternative to ENS, because ENS is meant to be this more robust kind of system that enables more advanced naming than just the nicks do. So ENS can be used as a domain name alternative. Nicks don't really have that feature at all. So it's not really meant to be an alternative, I guess is the simple answer. The next question is by Pursuit. Why does Kusama need a bridge when the consensus algorithms are similar to what Polkadot would use? So while that's true, Kusama and Polkadot use the same consensus algorithms, namely Babe, Grandpa, NPOS. The reason there's a bridge that would be needed is because these two networks will be distinct and separate. So Kusama will be its own network and Polkadot will be its own network. The way for these two networks to talk to each other would be through a bridge. So with that said, because the two consensus algorithms are the same between Kusama and Polkadot, creating this bridge is going to be a lot easier than creating a bridge between, let's say, Kusama and Bitcoin. So both of these chains have finality. Both of these chains will share a lot of the same code. So building a bridge between these two is probably not as difficult an undertaking as building a bridge between some other networks. All right, next question from Nasith. It is heard that next phase of adoption will come from gaming, DeFi, gambling. What is your choice for bringing mass adoption? So that's an interesting question. I think all three of these have their place. I would say I would change gambling to rather be kind of more prediction markets use case than throwing dice. But I think each of these have very interesting futures using blockchain protocols. DeFi is, of course, a little bit more ahead, I guess, than either gaming or prediction markets right now. But I think there's interesting use cases for NFTs on gaming and and using prediction markets as well. All right, so another question from Bruno. When an account is reaped, which means deleted due to too little balance, is the name cleared? Follow up. So no resolver back to KSM address, no sending to nicks. So no. So sorry, the no to the second answer, or sorry. Let me start from the first question. Is the name cleared? Yes. So the name would be cleared if the account is reaped. Follow up. So no resolver back to a KSM, no sending. So no on the protocol level, but on the UI level, so using the app's dashboard, the answer is yes. So you can type in a nick instead of a address. But I think that's more UI magic than anything intended on the protocol level. But if they're not, so that's the thing, they're not unique. So I think what the UI does is it pulls up the matching ones, or maybe it's just the ones that you have in the address book. But it's all UI magic there. All right. So the next question is from Bruno. What happens when the council seats are all full, but someone is submitted as candidate and then gets more votes than any existing candidate originally had? How does this popular new candidate get into the council? So this would, so when this happens, the candidate would be elected at the next term. And the least kind of voted for candidate would lose their spot in the council. All right, so we have a few more questions here. So I'll try to go through these a little more quickly. So a question from Alexander. What is Kusama token characteristics, token economy, total circulating supply, inflation, emission, etc.? So I would say take a look at the app's dashboard for all of these data points. But the total stuff like the total circulating supply, inflation, emission are the same as they would be on Polkadot. Oh, thank you, Mario Pino, for posting those numbers there. Total issuance is 7.912 KSM, or 912 million KSM. Total stake bonded is 2.957 million KSM. Question from Ilhan. If you have an idea for development on Kusama, is this ideally presented on the council or is there another channel? So there's a couple different paths you can take. So one path would be creating a grant proposal or applying for a grant to Web3 Foundation. You could do this on the Web3 Foundation GitHub. Another path would potentially be applying to the council. The council could make a proposal to give you some tokens to do that. Alternatively, if your development is something very useful, the council could just include it as a parachain. So it really depends on where you are with your project. I would say if you're kind of earlier in your project, you might want to look for a grant from Web3 Foundation. But maybe later down the line, as Kusama is a little bit more mature, presenting it to the council might be a good path as well. All right, a question from Mario Pino. I see that now you can select a file when you set the nickname. It's possible to use it to display an image. No, I don't think that'll work because the nicknames are only 32 characters. So I think if you submit more than 32 bytes, which an image is more than 32 bytes, then the transaction will fail. You can submit emojis though. So using the hex converter, you can convert emojis to hex. All right, two more questions. Question from Dia AU. How optimistic are you of the future use cases of the KSM compared to when you started it? What are the next planned steps to increase adoption and awareness among people, and more specifically among professional asset management? So I think I'm optimistic about the future use case of KSM. I think we're still not yet out of soft launch, and we still haven't really seen the most exciting feature of Kusama been engaged with yet. So I am very optimistic about when governance comes to play. As far as increasing awareness among professional asset management, I'm not sure if I think much about this directly. I think mostly we're going for awareness for the 4 roles I kind of mentioned in the presentation: the builders, the maintainers, users, and governance. And final question: how can the community know which is the best validator or validators for staking? So there's some teams, independent teams, that are making tools to do this, but really it comes down to just doing some research into who runs these validators and looking at things like the validator commission and determining whether or not these validators have been slashed in the past or what their infrastructure looks like. And then after learning a little bit about the validator and their infrastructure, you'll be in a much better place to make a decision. All right, so now the part that I'm sure everybody's been waiting for, the live drawing of the winners of the Kusama raffle. So let me bring back my full screen onto here, and I'll show you guys how I'll draw this number. So what I'll do is just use Python to give me a random integer between 1 and 300, and whoever picked that number in the question that you had when you signed up for this crowdcast will be the winner. So let me just pull up the answers to the questions off screen. Just a moment. Okay, so we have 65 entries. So this might be, I might have to draw a few numbers before we have a winner. I'll announce just the first name of the winner on stream, and then we'll send an email to them afterward. So the first number is 30. Let's see if we have anyone that picked 30. We've got one close, 31. No one picked 30, so I'll go to the next number. Oh yeah, that's right. So we'll verify if they retweeted afterward. If they don't retweet, then we'll pull a number off stream if we see that they didn't retweet. 175. Did anyone pick 175? I don't see, no 175. 216. So there's 217 off by 1. Yeah, it might have been a good idea to restrict it a little bit more. Okay, 177. Nope, no 177. Yeah, it looks like this could take a while. 179. Let me just look through here. Nope. 70. $39. Yeah, so we'll verify that you retweeted after the stream. So after the stream we'll send an email. And before we send the email, we'll verify that that they retweeted. So still looks like we haven't found a winner yet. 301. We have someone who had 300. let's see. $239. Nope, no $239. We have about 6 people who did pick $256. So if we land on $256, not sure what we'll do. $149. $273. $192. So we will find 2 winners. $143. Close. Nope. $251. $263. $54. Okay, I think I'm just gonna pick. I'm just gonna draw a couple at a time now. So 255. I think oh, we do have a 255. So 255 is the first winner. Who is this? Let's see. Solomon. So Solomon from San Francisco. We'll check that you retweeted the tweet. And then you are the winner of the 25 KSM and the Kusama t-shirt. So we'll send you an email after the crowdcast. All right, but there's still one shirt to be raffled off. So let's find the next winner. 61. $69. I'm sure someone picked 69. It looks like someone picked 696, which was unfortunately too high. 56. $283. I don't see a 283. Nope. 222. I don't think we have that. 62. $268. Okay, let's just draw a couple. 217, 266, 101. $217. So it looks like we do have a 217. And it is Schalte from Berlin. So Schalte, you are the winner of the t-shirt. I hope you remember to retweet the tweet. And that concludes the crowdcast for this week. Thanks everyone for joining along. We'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.